So as she said, my name is Christine Lister, and I specialize in helping people break the barriers that hinder their well-being. And today's barrier is anger management. And anger management and I have quite the history. I jokingly say that all my demons of the past become my specialties of the present. So this is one of them. In fact, one of my favorite anger management stories is when I was newly married. I took this wedding ring, and I was so out of control. I took my wedding ring off, I was mad at my husband, and I hucked it across the kitchen, and I hit the window and put a big crack in it. And it stood as mute testimony against my inability to manage my anger. So I wish I could say that was the first time I realized I had a problem with anger, but it wasn't. And so there was a journey that I went on that kind of helped me to start to understand what the role of anger was in my own life, and to try to manage that better. And not just manage it, but heal from it. And then really, anger gets a bad rap in our society, and some would want to conclude that we should just completely eliminate it. In fact, let me share with you some, is this on? Okay. Some anger quotes. So when you look at this list of anger quotes, it doesn't really cast anger in quite a positive light. And one of my favorite ones on here is the anger is as a stone cast into a wasp's nest. What a great visual that is. And so, or you know, an angry man is angry with himself when he returns to reason. Anger has so much negative connotation to it. And I would bet if I asked anybody in this room to give me kind of a brief story of their own kind of dealings with anger, I'm sure every one of us would have at least one instance where we were angry and lost control to some degree. Now, some of us are not rageaholics, there's different degrees of losing our temper and that kind of thing. But we all have some, connection with, misapplied, misappropriate anger. So the reasons that I like to study anger is kind of threefold. Misplaced anger, we know this, has negative interpersonal connotations. So if you're not communicating effectively with the primary relationships in your life, and you don't manage your anger or frustration levels well, then clearly there's a problem. You won't have the connection that you're desiring to have with others. It has internal implications, intrapersonal issues. If you don't resolve your anger well, then you start to kind of, you can turn that inward, and then there's all kinds of psychosomatic stuff that occurs as a result, and that's just not fun. And then, but here's another thing. Well-placed anger can actually be very positive. It can be the catalyst for change. It can be a method by which we can get in touch with what we need to pay attention to. And anger actually can serve such a functional purpose if we can direct it well. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So here's where we're going today. Here's my objectives. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence first off the bat. How many of you are familiar with emotional intelligence? Okay, a lot of people. We're just going to do a brief overview on that, and we're going to talk about the connection to anger regulation. The second objective is we're going to understand, just on a cursory level, the physiology of anger, because that's definitely very relevant, and how to deactivate anger arousal, which is an important piece. We're going to identify 4 common triggers of anger, and these are not exhaustive, but this is just something kind of a starting point, and it gives us something to connect with, and then to kind of build from there. And then finally, this is going to be my favorite part. We're going to use 2 anger awareness exercises that you can use in clinical practice. One of them is a sheet that you already have. We're going to get to that when we get to that point. And then the second one is a tactile experience, which my lovely assistant, Hallie, will help me with when it's time to pass that out. So let's jump in and get started. Oops. Oh boy, this is very okay. So emotional intelligence is defined as it consists of the ability to perceive and express emotion, use emotions to facilitate thought, understand and reason with emotions, and finally to regulate emotion. When we talk about well-being, emotion, I also, by the way, I teach part-time up at Azusa Pacific University, and I talk to my students about this all the time. You're not going to pay attention to something you don't care about. Emotion has a very real implication in our everyday lives. you guys are not going to care about anything that comes out of my mouth unless there's some connection point. Like there's a reason why you're here. Maybe it's the free food. Maybe it's, you know, the topic. Maybe, you know, you have to be here or whatever. But there's something that compels you to be here, and there's something that will compel you to pay attention to what's going on. And that something has to do with emotion. One of the things that I like to highlight with my students is there's a gentleman by the name of Ebbinghaus that did early studies on memory and learning, and he found that it's 9 times harder to learn meaningless data. So if you can't connect to something and you can't make meaning out of it or somehow find relevancy for your own life, it's going to be 9 times harder for you to learn it. So I tell my students all the time, my history of psychology class, you've got to find meaning in this class. Because if you don't, you're not going to learn anything, and it's going to be a disaster for you. So, so there's the takeaway piece, 9 times harder if you don't connect to it. So people with high emotional intelligence are more likely to employ problem-solving coping, which is a very functional thing. And they will, you know, they'll have those strategies to deal with things like anger and anxiety or anything else. People with low emotional intelligence have a tendency to use things like avoidance to deal with anxiety. It's also linked with increased worry and all kinds of, you know, stress-related stuff. You know, again, avoidance and that kind of thing. So there's 4 components to emotional intelligence, and these are just in brief. If you want to know more about emotional intelligence, I didn't bring the book with me here, but there's a good book by Goleman that's called Emotional Intelligence. If you guys have read it, it's got some really good data in there. So the 4 components are, the first one is the accurate perception of emotion both within yourself and with somebody else, and the ability to express your own emotion effectively. How many of you have ever been surprised by an emotional reaction that you've had? All of us, right? And then when it's over, you're like, wow, did I just have an out-of-body experience? Like, what, you know, who was that person? And so, and early on in the days before I got a handle on my anger, that was happening to me quite frequently. And it was very distressing because, you know, it's kind of, now it's kind of funny. My husband and I can laugh about it. We're going to celebrate 20 years in August. But, you know, and I said, wow, you didn't know what kind of a spitfire you signed on to, like, be married to when we got together. But hallelujah, you know, that's all behind us. But, you know, to be able to get in touch with what it is that's going on, because we want to understand ourselves better, right? Because when we have a better understanding of ourselves, we're healthier, we can interact with each other better. It's just, you know, our life is more meaningful. It's, you know, we move from the survive to the thrive part of our experience in life. It's also, the second component is awareness of how emotions shape your thinking, decision-making, and coping with stress. So here's an example. How many of you have ever lost somebody significantly in your life? Okay. Grief is a huge, huge thing. And we underestimate how critical grief actually is in our daily kind of functioning. A few years back, my husband's best friend committed suicide. It was a shock to our system. We were not expecting it. And all of a sudden, and you know, here I am, grief is one of my specialties, but you know, whenever you go through things, a lot of times it doesn't help. I mean, you have an awareness of it, but you know, viscerally inside, you're still kind of like, urgh. So what happens in the grief process is you are so consumed. I liken it to like the background processing of a computer. And so it takes up all this emotional energy and reserve inside of you that simple decisions are difficult to come to, right? So when you are under the, you know, the influence of grief, if you will, does it shape your thinking? Yeah, it prevents a lot of things. It's a hindrance, right? I remember standing in front of my closet, like, I couldn't even decide what to wear. I was just so overcome. You know, even like eating, it's like eating 3 times a day was a chore. And it happened around Christmas time, and I thought, good God, how are we going to get the Christmas decorations down? And, you know, I say that God sent us an angel, 2 angels in the form of a couple that came and helped us take everything down in the span of 2 hours. It was amazing. Because just even thinking about taking down Christmas decorations when we were like in the midst of our grief was just, ugh, it's just draining. So it shapes your thinking if you're not aware of how that happens. This third component has to do with the ability to understand in your own emotions, which may be complex and contradictory. An example of this is I'm a mom. My daughter was born, it'll be 15 years in October, and we had been married 5 years, and we wanted to have a child, and it was all great and everything. But when she came, right before she came, my mother-in-law died, So there was a grief kind of thing going on there. And then I had a difficult delivery, which was not fun at all. And so there was conflicting things. So when she came, I experienced this profound joy at finally meeting this little person that was in my body for so long. And then a loss because there were some hormonal things going on. And then, you know, just like an overwhelm because I'd been in the hospital 2.5 days before she was born. And I was exhausted. So there was all these complex kind of emotions like hitting me at the same time. And so a joyous event oftentimes, yes, has the joyous component, but it could have other elements too, and that can be confusing. Another common example of this that people you know, experience is the promotion. So we all want to get promoted and make more money and everything, that's great. But then all of a sudden now we're thrust into a new position, and yes, there's more money, but there's new responsibility, whereas before we knew what we were doing. Now we're kind of the new kid on the block, and that's disconcerting. So the happy occasion has elements to it that are not so happy. And so that, you know, to be able to understand the complexity and sometimes the contradictory emotional expressions and states that we have is part of the overall understanding of emotional intelligence. And then finally, the last one is the ability to regulate your emotions effectively. So in that is the process of learning to dampen negative emotions and then also to use positive emotions productively. Interestingly enough, if you are kind of psychologically, you know, stable and you lean more towards the optimistic kind of viewpoint, positive things that happen, you're able to take them in stride and enjoy them. If you are not emotionally stable and you tend towards the pessimistic side, when positive things happen, it's hard to connect to the positives. I'll give you, again, the example of getting that promotion. If you've ever heard somebody, I have my husband's aunt is like this. I love her to death. She's a great woman. But she has a pessimistic viewpoint. So even when positive things happen, in my ears, I'm like, wow, that's great. And then she's like, yeah, but, and then she starts talking about all the negatives. And that is really difficult, right? Because, you know, I tend to be an optimistic person, so I'm kind of the, you know, the glass is half full and look on the bright side. And there's times it gets challenged, you know, like when my husband's best friend committed suicide, I was not happy. I didn't want to hear about like, oh, you know, good will come of this, whatever. Are you kidding me? I'm just like devastated in this moment. You know, let me have my moment of like crap, you know, and then I can kind of get out of it or whatever. But if you have a more pessimistic, or if you know somebody has a more pessimistic viewpoint, they're actually robbing themselves of being able to experience a positive life event and enjoy it. And that's tragedy, really. And so definitely that's something that, you know, is part of emotional intelligence. So how does this relate to anger regulation? I put up here, there's 3 elements, and we're going to unpack these as we kind of go forward. So there's the physiological, the cognitive, and then the behavioral. So the physiological elements have to do with being aware of your own body's clues. Everybody in here has physiological reactions. And anger, being a strong emotion, has some very clear, specific physiological, you know, responses. They're going to vary slightly from person to person, but we're going to talk about physiology in a moment, and I'll unpack that here in the next slide. But to be aware of what your own clues are so that you know that you're getting close to your anger threshold. So anger is on a continuum, right? So there's, you know, there's mild irritation, frustration on one side, and then all the way up to like out of control blind rage. And some people, I was watching something just real briefly. I think, you know, I watched the show Intervention from time to time, and then they I don't know if they have them now, but they were talking about people that were rageaholics. And I found that to be fascinating. So they were actually, because when we talk about physiology in a minute, the rush of energy, the rush of perceived power that comes with it, whoo, that's heady, you know, especially if you're trying to cover up something else, for sure. But you being aware of your own body signals, that kind of tells you you're getting angry. I deal with anger management in clinical practice, and all the time I'll have somebody say, well, I just got angry like that. You know, I went from 0 to 100 in like a blink of an eye. I'm like, oh, okay, let's slow the process down. Let's kind of walk through what happened, because there was a triggering event, and there was a series of things that got you to the place that you that you finally like flipped your lid, but you were not aware of that process. And so there is, when we slow it down, there is the ability to see and track how did we get there, okay? The cognitive elements have to do with understanding the role of belief in your anger, in your expression of anger, and then your anger threshold. Whenever an unpleasant event occurs, an unpleasant event can actually be subjective, right? For some people, traffic is an unpleasant event. Is that a pleasant event for anybody? I don't know, probably not. But I have actually, not that I do this perfectly, but I have learned to actually, like if I hit traffic, I'm using that opportunity to really kind of like just, you know, get in a different zone. I turn on, you know, like some inspirational music, and I just, you know, there's nothing I can do, it's out of my control. I wish I had that magic wand to wave and like part the Red Sea of the traffic and just go on my way. But that's not going to happen. So the only choice I have is how do I manage myself in that particular situation. So your belief system and your self-talk and what kind of goes through your head as far as your thoughts go matter. You know, they come to play. And then finally, there's the behavioral elements. How do you express anger appropriately and efficiently? There is a reason to have anger because it tells us that there's something that needs our attention. But how do we express it productively and appropriately? Okay, so we're going to move on to, this thing is super sensitive. Okay, so the physiology of anger. We're not going to go too deep into this, but I thought, you know, this is always very interesting and fascinating to me. So there's the autonomic nervous system. There's the sympathetic branch, there's the parasympathetic branch. The sympathetic branch is where the fight or flight, you know, the activation part kind of happens. And, you know, in the brain, the hypothalamus is the thing that activates the fight or flight. And there's all kinds of fun stuff that happen. There's neurotransmitters, there's hormone things that come, the adrenaline, norepinephrine, all that kind of stuff. And so what happens is we have a result of like a muscle tension, you know, all these things. The energy burst, the heart rate goes up, the blood vessels constrict, you know, all of the blood is going away from the extremities into the big muscles so that we can flee or we can fight, you know, depending on what the situation calls for. And we are doing those like lightning fast, making that determination. And this is all part of anger. In fact, I was reading something in there. I brought some books, by the way, so if you want to kind of peruse those afterwards, that's fine. Talking about epinephrine was more associated with, oh gosh, how am I going to forget? Anxiety, I believe, and norepinephrine was more associated with anger. I believe that's it. Not, I mean, if you want to find out, you can Google it and find out more information. But anyway, so you know, all those things. And what's interesting too is there's a neurotransmitter and then there's a hormonal piece. And the neurotransmitter is quicker, but it wears off quicker. But then the hormonal release takes longer, but then the effects are longer lasting. So it's a redundant system, which I found interesting. So how do we deactivate that? There's some things that you probably have already heard of, and there's merit to them, you know, which is why they're still out there. There's the deep breathing, the muscle relaxation, and then the 4 R's I'll tell you in just a minute. So the deep breathing, we all know this to be true, right? I mean, we're all in like mental health, so we kind of get it, even if we don't do it perfectly. You know, we still like, you know, on an academic cognitive level, we get it. So the deep breathing, one of the things I used to work in recovery, and I was talked to, you know, my classes, I would say, when we are upset, when we are anxious, angry, and by the way, I think of anxiety and fear as first cousins to anger. So that's why when I talk about things, I'm going to kind of be talking about fear and anxiety as part of this too. So we may not become aware that our breathing is shallow or even nervous if we're nervous. And so the oxygen gets depleted, right? And our brain needs oxygen. So when we take the deep breathing, like, then we give this wonderful hit of oxygen to our brain, and then it helps us to clear our head. If you've ever been kind of like in this, like, you know, kind of get into this tunnel vision, and, you know, you're just like you get rigid thinking, and you're just, oh my gosh, I can't even think outside the box. When you take a deep breath, it allows you to kind of like just take a step back and just open up your view just a little bit, because it gives you that additional hit of oxygen. And some of the ways that you would do this is, you know, taking the slow, you know, deep breaths, and the idea of like when you inhale, you're trying to inhale from the belly first to really fill your lungs. I find it harder to do it when I'm standing up than when I'm sitting or laying down. Laying down to me is the easiest. And, you know, if we had more space, I'd say, hey, let's all lay down and start to like do our deep breathing. And then when you breathe in and exhale out, you want to exhale out twice as long as when you inhale. So if you're breathing in for a count of 4, you want to breathe out for a count of 8, and that kind of thing. And then also too, just being aware of what the breath feels like in the body. Oftentimes when we talk about things like anger or not being in touch with our emotions, we divorce ourselves from our bodily like signals and what it feels like, what these different things feel like in our body. And you know, here's an idea, like make peace with your body. Your body is your friend. It's trying to communicate with you and give you some clues as to what's going on and what you need to pay attention to. The other thing is the muscle relaxation. You can do things like, if you do the breathing, you can do a gentle head roll, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, do that kind of thing. You can also do progressive muscle relaxation. You can start, like you can do a shoulder shrug and then let it go. You can like focus your attention on like scrunching out your face and then relaxing it. Oh, and here's my new best friend, by the way. So he's helping us to get in touch with our relaxation. So you can do a progressive muscle relaxation and hit the big groups and stuff, and it doesn't take very long. It could take like, you know, you could take anywhere from like 15 to 20 to 30 minutes depending on how much time you give yourself. One of the things that I've done with my classes in the past is I take them outside of the classroom and I have them do like a 15-minute just quiet time, where I just, you know, I say give yourself permission to quiet the mind, to just breathe, just to be outside, and just to relax, just to enjoy yourself in the moment, kind of a mindfulness thing. And what happens as a result is it cleanses you. You know, even as I'm talking about it, I'm feeling more relaxed because it's the idea of like letting go of the things that you cannot control anyway. And then again, but there's that tension that gets trapped in the body, so you need to kind of, you know, do it. I love stress balls, and you know, in a little bit we're going to do a Play-Doh exercise because that helps you. It's a very tactile thing. There's a lot of energy in the body, and it needs to come out. And anger is one of those things, you know, like there's energy that gets trapped, and so you need to express it somehow. And when you express it effectively, then you're like able to kind of like breathe. All right, I like to talk about these 4 R's. So on a practical sense, you know, when there's an anger kind of thing going on, if possible, remove yourself. This is a quick and easy thing, right? Remove yourself from the environment. In my work with couples or moms and daughters or whatever, if the tensions are rising and all, the communication has really shut down. So you don't have, like, there's, you know, everybody's on send mode and no one's on receive mode. So at that point, it's, you know, it's counterproductive to keep talking. So if you can do one of these, time out, you know, separate, go to your corner, and then come back when you both have kind of calmed down. Then you can kind of try to, you know, try it again. So if at all possible, remove yourself from the activating environment in person. Now, unfortunately, it's not always possible, because when you have, sometimes I have husband and wives that they just can't help themselves. One says time out, the other one's like, no, chasing them, like, stop doing that, because it's not going to help. So if possible, do it. Another one is redirect. So redirect your energy, your rush of energy into something productive. You know, if you come home and you've had like traffic and you're just going crazy or whatever, maybe, you know, that might be a good time to wash the floors, you know, or do something. Vacuum. Another one is reduce your overall tension by physical exertion. I think I'm preaching to the choir. You guys probably know, you know, physical exertion, physical activity is a really good stress reliever, stress reducer, and overall wellness factor. The more you do it, the better, you know. And one of the things, this is hilarious, I was talking to one gentleman that we were working with over him getting over his anger with his divorce. And I had prescribed to him to actually go to the batting cages, because I wanted him to focus his anger on something, and then the contact of like hitting it is like, it's a impact, and it actually helped him to expel that energy. And it was satisfying because there was an impact. Now, it's different than like having someone hit the pillow, you know, because I know they've done studies where they say that can actually produce more aggression. But the idea of hitting a ball, there's something satisfying in that, because when you hit that sucker and you see it fly, you're like, ah. And it's like, there goes,
sound of yeah, there's the sound of the crack of the ball and the bat, and then there's the visual piece where the ball's going. And you can, you know, I even told him, like, picture, I didn't say picture your ex-wife on the ball.
Your wife going?
No, but picturing your anger, and then you're hitting it, and watching it kind of sail off into the sunset. It's satisfying. So. And then finally, reflect. This is an important piece. If you find yourself that you have a lot of triggers of anger and you're constantly upset, then you need to pay attention to that. You need to start finding out what are the themes of your anger and to be able to, you know, kind of deal with them. And so the next thing we're going to actually talk about are triggers, common triggers. Whoops. Okay, so here's 4 common triggers. There's injustice, frustration, feeling insulted or offended, and feeling out of control. So the first one, injustice. We witness something that just seems wrong, and you know, our initial desire is to rush in and restore justice because we don't like injustice. That is a good thing. You know, we don't want to be comfortable and complacent with injustice. There is a reason why we are upset by what we witness. Somebody's wrongly accused, or you know, something happens, our sense of fairness is touched on. You know, we definitely want to tap into that. Now, where it gets counterproductive is if, you know, you don't have an appropriate outlet for it, and then you start getting aggro everywhere else, and then you displace it into other areas, and you know, that kind of thing. Underlying feelings with injustice might be helplessness or feeling unsupported, especially if the injustice was against you. So you might feel like, hey, I'm on my own. I'm an island. Nobody's got my back. And that can be very disconcerting. So there's also, I always advocate for looking at the underneath kind of emotions as well. Another one is frustration, either at yourself for not being able to be competent in something you think you should be, or at somebody else. Like I'm standing in line at Starbucks waiting for my coffee, and the person in front of me is taking forever to order. And I'm like, I have to go, time, you know, like, can you just say your stupid order and then we can like go? Or, you know, my favorite one of this is when we were like new parents, we did not get proper training in that Chinese puzzle called a car seat. There's like the base, and you put it in the seatbelt, and then you somehow like snap it in. It's got all these like little tricks, and I swear it's like you have to have a magic wand, you know, and then it like unhooks or whatever. And I just remember when my daughter was a baby, and here's 2 reasonably intelligent, mature adults trying to get this car seat in, and my poor daughter's in there like, I'm looking around, and I'm just like, why can't you do this? And he's like, why can't you do it? And anyway, so frustration at yourself or someone else. The underlying feelings oftentimes might be things like, you know, we are, where we go, again, helplessness, embarrassment. You know, come on now, I've got a master's degree, I think I should be able to figure out a car seat, you know, or whatever. So you feel like, you know, embarrassed or shamed or whatever, and it's always easier to blame somebody else than yourself. The third one is feeling insulted or offended. Someone puts us down or they disrespect us, and that, you know, that touches on us, right? You know, we have an identity, and when somebody insults us or offends us, that kind of assaults our identity, and our sense of identity matters to us because we, you know, we want to be in touch with who we are, and, you know, we feel good about ourselves and who we are. Somebody says something mean to us or whatever, all of a sudden it's like, you know, what's going on? When I worked in the recovery, this was really big. A lot of the people that came through the rehab center that I worked at were directly from the prison environment, which is always a fun one. And so, you know, somebody would say, look at them wrong, or say, you're stupid. And oh my gosh, you would have thought like it was the worst thing possible. And I'm like, let's think about this. Someone said you're stupid, and does that make it true because they said it? Well, no, but they shouldn't have said it. Well, okay, do you really want to give them that much power? Because when you react to somebody else saying something to you, all of a sudden you're giving them power. Mm-hmm. And guess what? That's on you. That's not a fun thing to confront. All of a sudden it's like, oh, the responsibility lies with me. But the transformative thing about that is, yes, the responsibility lies with me. If I give them the power, I can remove it. I can take it back. You know what? Just because you don't like me, that's a bummer because we all want everybody to like us. But, you know, we can't control that. So, I mean, if I'm trying to be a woman of integrity, I do the best I can, You know, I deal with disgruntled students. Not every student thinks I'm the best professor out there. In fact, I've gotten quite the distinction at times in some of my student evaluations. Like, this is the worst professor I've ever had. You know, all right. So feeling insulted or offended. The base of those feelings have to do with things like shame, loneliness, fear. And when anger comes in, it kind of, again, it energizes us and it gives us kind of a, you know, an ability to respond. And then finally, feeling out of control. None of us like to feel out of control. We're probably all a bunch of control freaks. I think the whole world is filled with control freaks. We just don't, some of us don't want to admit it because we're like, no, we're letting it go. I will happily admit I'm a recovering control freak and I will be recovering for the rest of my life. You know, so when we can't have control over another person or situation, that really can kind of rock our boat. And underlying feelings in that might be, again, helplessness, fear, or powerlessness. Things that don't feel good. So again, in all of these situations, anger comes in and hey, it gives us that boost of energy, it empowers us, it makes us feel like we can do something about this, and I'm gonna do it right now. Well, that's a false sense of empowerment. It can be a positive one, we'll talk about that again in a little bit, but oftentimes it doesn't, and so we just need to be aware of that. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the anger awareness exercise, so I'm gonna have you guys take that sheet out. And here's what I want you to do. You can use this. If you want to not jot this down on that paper and have a clean copy, that's fine. Or I don't know if they would have additional copies to give you. But I want you to think of a situation. We're just going to walk through this really briefly, and then it's going to feed into our tactile experience. Think of a situation recently where you got angry, and I want it to be a good one, like at least a 6 out of 10. So you were definitely angry, and you know, good and pissed off, okay? And then, so the worksheet has a series of things for you to kind of go through. So the first one was the actions. What did you and any others involved do? So kind of what was the situation and what happened? And just jot down just, you know, just a few things. The second thing that you're going to do as you kind of work through this is the beliefs. So what were your expectations of yourself, the other person if there was other people involved, and the situation? So it's about expectations. The third thing that you're going to identify is the underlying feelings. Aside from anger, what other emotions came into play? And think in terms of, you know, the different triggers and what we said as far as they were, you know, the underlying feelings there. The next one is denial. So what part did you blame on others, and in what ways did you minimize your part? And maybe you didn't. I mean, this assumes that you did, but you don't. It may not apply, and that's okay. But if you don't think so, you're in denial. And then finally, the cost. How did your anger affect you or others? In what ways did your anger cause harm? And again, maybe it didn't. This question implies that maybe there was something there that cost you or cost another person. And just take a few moments to jot down your ideas. So what I want you to do, after you've jotted down some things on your worksheet, you can go ahead and open up your little Play-Doh. And what you're going to do is, you know, if you have an aversion to Play-Doh, of course you don't have to do this. Go ahead and, you know, just work it back and forth between your hands. And the situation that you wrote about, I want you to really engage in that anger, you know, in that emotional expression that you had. And I want you to really kind of project it into the Play-Doh, okay? So really work it in there. Really work it in there. And I'll tell you in a moment just what to do. Kelly, can you get one? You were busy writing, so she didn't want to.
No.
Oh, you like to play with it. Do you want another one? Sure. Okay, so what you're doing when you're going back and forth, one of the things that, again, there's tension in the body and there's stress, and this is why we like stress balls, right? This guy's like the little stress ball. I think I might get tired of them after a while.
Doesn't take long.
I might want to throw them across the room. So, you know, when we have tension or stress in the body, the very act of going back and forth is something that helps us to express that. I've had anxious clients in my office before, and I'll give them, this one gal was remarkable. It was remarkable. When we would work together, I would give her this small little Play-Doh, and she would play, it was her Play-Doh, and we kept it in my office, and every time she'd come in, and she was a young adult, she would play with it back and forth while we were talking. She was an internal processor, and so oftentimes when I would ask her a question, we'd have some periods of silence, but man, she was working that Play-Doh. And so there was a lot of kind of processing going on that if I could get a little window into her head, it'd be fascinating, but I didn't need to because the processing was happening. And then when she'd be done, and then she'd look at me and it's like, okay, now we're going on to the next thing. So there's a lot of tension and stress that can get relieved. So think about what you wrote down in your worksheet. And so now what I want you to do, and then I'm going to ask you guys to you know, I'm going to have some volunteers share when you're done. Shape it into something that represents your anger. What you might feel, what you might experience, just any kind of shape, and then and keep it in that shape when you're ready, and then I'll ask for a few of you to kind of share what shape you came up with and how that represents your anger. So I'll just give you just a few minutes to do that. Oh no, do you want to grab her another one, Hallie?
Wow.
I've been working hard on mine.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. Some of them don't do much. Yeah. I guess I could muscle it, or I could just accept that this is where the Play-Doh is.
Is that one better?
You know, it's really fun to like look around and see you guys like smashing your Play-Dohs into different shapes and stuff. We'll just take like another few seconds or so. You might be ready. Okay, how about a couple of volunteers to say what there's, oh, your hand shot up right away.
I had a good one when you said that. So I have a twin sister. No one knows how to push your buttons like a twin sister. A sister, and then you, throw the twin into the mix. Oh my goodness. So she was commenting on certain lifestyle situations, and I made a cube because I felt like she was putting me in a box, and nothing can make me more angry than when I felt like I had nowhere to go from there with what she was saying. Yes,
exactly.
So it was interesting to do this, and when you asked to make this in a shape, I've never even thought about that before, so it kind of just came right to me. So it's really almost insightful to look back and think, wow, that's why I was so angry.
Yeah, absolutely, that's great. And then give me a rating, how, like on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 is no anger, 10 is off the charts. Where was your anger in that?
Probably a 9.
Okay, good. That's a good one. Okay, so you really like got into that. Awesome.
Yeah.
I thought I was gonna go ahead.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. So I got my intern number last week, but the week before I had a client calling me. They've been waiting months to see me, and they called. They were all anxious. When can we see you? So I thought the BBS had gone a couple of days after the post date for my number, so I called. The FBI had rejected my prints a month earlier. I found out later, and they had never even contacted me up to that point. And I've been losing all this time. And they said, if your prints don't go through again, there'll be a 6-month delay. And not 6 months, 6 weeks. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, everything went through. But at the time, I felt angry, but there was a lot of sad and grief attached to it. It brought up all kinds of stuff related to my identity. So I did this totally flattened thing because I just felt like I was being annihilated.
Smashed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And same thing on a scale from 0 to 10, how angry?
It wasn't a rage. There was so much sadness attached to it. I'd say maybe like an 8,
Okay.
7 or an 8.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Yes, ma'am.
all of my emails stopped working. All my devices didn't turn getting my emails. So I've been calling AT&T.
It's frustrating.
Oh, well, 15 hours in the last week with laryngitis. And it was nuts. And it turns out that they were the responsible party, but I didn't know that until I found out yesterday going into Apple Store one more time. But they told me stories, they told me all this other stuff, they told me I had to spend money on outside services and everything else. And I mean, I was really pissed on. Shit on too. That's how I feel, because it was like they were taking my lack of knowledge and manipulating me and filling their time to be paid and not fixing anything.
Okay, so what's your shape?
I was like, yeah.
Where would you rate your
I was like a 10.
Okay,
because there's so much time to spend on this stuff. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And I started to feel crazy.
Yeah. Crazy making. Okay, good. Well, one or two more. Anybody else want to share? Holly, do you want to share yours? Arnie, do you want to share yours?
Okay, sure. So it just happened, on the way here, just as I turned the corner off of Pico and coming to Pico, and 4 days ago we had to make the decision to put my mother into hospice. She's 92 years old and dying of Alzheimer's, and she has chronic infections, and I'm the only one in San Diego that lives around the block from my mom that gets to kind of be the caregiver, even though she has 24-hour care. And so the doctor makes the decision, we'll start hospice. I notify everybody in the family that this is what we're going to do. And I was kind of on board with what the doctor wanted to do. Kind of let's just stop playing God, let the process begin, and we're going to make her comfortable. Well, my sister comes down and makes all these other decisions, and so she's the one that's, don't call her, please. She's the one in LA and doesn't have to live with my mom. She's not the one that has to see. She looks so good, but in reality, that's not what I see. So, so my sister's constantly saying, I'm worried about it. I'm worried about a younger cousin of ours that was raised like a younger brother. I'm worried about Johnny. I'm worried about Johnny. I'm worried about Johnny. And so I was on the phone with my wife, and I just screamed at the top of my lungs. We're having this conversation, it's going back and forth, and I just screamed, blank Johnny, my mother's dying. And then I felt great. I screamed it, People, people at the car next to me, like they're rolling up the window. They're laughing at the Don't look at him. Don't look at him. But then I was like, I immediately, and this is great. Is there a time limit here? my wife just goes, and she goes, yeah, okay, and then she just keeps going on the same monotone, okay. And I said, so I need to tell you, I'm really sorry that I screamed that. And that language was really inappropriate. She goes, oh, I know that. But it was the release of that for 4 days of going through, and there's really no answer to this, and so this is my little nail. So whatever that might be, so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And again, this is a perfect illustration of there was trapped energy and it needed to come out in the form of a scream for you. And so it is awesome that your wife was able to contain that and not take it personally, and she gave you a gift. She let you scream, she let you be raw, use your profanity, whatever, without judgment. And then you were done. You understood this wasn't the best way to deal with this, but in that moment, she gave you the gift of the space that you needed in order to just express it. Anyway, okay, so now what I want you to do is take your Play-Doh and I want you to pass it to your neighbor, exchange it with your neighbor, and when you get the new Play-Doh, you kind of, reshape it. Just, destroy the shape and reshape it and just put it in something new.
I feel like it goes with our
Yours is pretty, it's not quite as bad as the blue.
It's like I like my sword.
Yeah.
Well, it's really hilarious. Just reshape it into whatever you want to shape it. So don't shape it into your anger thing. Just reshape it. Just give it a new shape. All right, so now, this shouldn't take you too long, right? So now what I want you to do is I want you to verbalize, and then ask for a couple of volunteers. What was it like for you to see somebody else take your anger shape and reshape it? And what was it like for you to do that for somebody else's? It felt good, Beth? In what way?
Well, I had already been squeezing mine, but energetically it felt good to take theirs and change the form. It just felt more calm.
Okay, good. All right, somebody else. What was it like for you to reshape somebody else's, and also, or comment on what was it like for you to see somebody else's?
I think it also represents in terms of the color. Like mine was red, and I switched, and this one's green. And I've been molding it so much that it was warm, and this is cool. And so I think the tactile experience of it not only being like a more calming color, but also the feeling of it, that it's a cool kind of collected, like it symbolized that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Great. One more? Go ahead.
I started doing my caregiver thing, so give her a heart.
Oh, that's great.
I need a heart for you too.
We're all the same day. I wanted to, some of the, and if you want to give it back to the original person, that's fine. And then you guys can go over there.
The correct color.
Some of the more interesting shapes. Some of the more interesting shapes I've seen over the years, which I thought was really creative, somebody took it and just simply smashed it in their fist. And then when you open it up, it's a very interesting shape with a lot of jagged edges. And I remember, I didn't see them do it, so when they shared it, I was like, what is that? They said it's a clenched fist. Others, I did one time where I did like a circle. You know, like I rolled it and then made it a circle, because I feel like when I'm angry, I'm in kind of like spinning. Or somebody else did like a ball, where they felt like very dense, and it's just like this knot that just kind of does that. So here's the takeaway piece of that. I forgot your name. Tyler. When Tyler said that, I wasn't in touch with that until, I never thought about it until I made a shape, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm boxed in. That is part of you getting in touch with your body's signals, right? So there's, you know, again, we each have our own kind of physiological, you know, roadmap when it comes to anger and our frustration. So get in touch with that. So the fact that you got in touch with like, wow, I feel boxed in. I feel, you know, confined, constrained, whatever. That can be revelatory, because now when that happens, when your sister is doing her thing, you're more in touch with, this is what it's triggering in me. So there's an awareness piece, and it gives you a chance to, you know, kind of figure that out from there. So definitely, you know, these two exercises I think are good. I didn't have you guys comment on the worksheet, but, you know, I would encourage you on your own time to, you know, kind of see what you wrote down, see if there's anything that you need to kind of look at. Again, here's my resources, and I would encourage you guys to go to those. I have a couple of books over there that I brought with me. Not all of the stuff that's here is there, but there's a few books on specifically on anger. And just to be aware on the back end, there's kind of one philosophy out there that kind of looks at wanting to eliminate anger altogether. So, you know, you can subscribe to that, and that's fine. That's one viewpoint, like let's eliminate anger. It's not really adaptive, it's not functional for today, blah, 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 whatever. And one of the books over there kind of takes that approach. Another approach is, you know, let's kind of make friends with our anger and see how we can use it productively and that kind of thing. So there's both of those kind of viewpoints represented in the books over there. So you can kind of peruse them and see if any of them might look like they might be interesting either for you to read or to pass on to clients or people that you think would benefit. So that's all I have. If you guys, I don't know if you wanted to, you know, if there's like questions that you would like to ask or feedback. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. It's sort of related to domestic violence, but it's the anger, the anger component. That when a person loses control in their anger, I've heard it said that basically, let's say 2 people or more involved, the person who is angry, in a way, is not the one who's in control. And I was wondering if somebody could just
Yeah,
You could
so
have-
back to the physiology of anger, there's the part of the brain, the amygdala, that like, in essence, if you've ever had that hijacked feeling, like you're just out of control, like when I took my ring off and I threw it, you know, in that moment I was out of control and I couldn't stop myself. It was like in that moment, the amygdala is like the emotional kind of part, and it's part of the alarm system in the brain. And so in essence, you know, my executive functioning was offline. If you've ever seen Dan Siegel, he talks about the brain. It's like when you flip your lid, you know, type of thing. So yeah, in that moment, it's like just get out of the way, because there's no reasoning with somebody who's in a rage. You just need to get out, you know, because it's not safe. It's not safe for the person. It's not safe for the one who's in a rage. And you know, and then at a certain point when they calm down, then you can kind of reevaluate. So if that happens a lot, if there's a rageaholic, they need to come to a place to decide themselves that that's not appropriate behavior. Because in the case, like I mentioned earlier, where there's this intervention shows that some people like rage because it's that rush of adrenaline and it gets them like, you know, like powerful and I'm gonna do my thing, but it's a false sense of control. It's kind of hard. People can get addicted to that, just like a substance, right? We actually our behavior can change the neurocircuitry of our brain and cause us to want to tap into that more and more. It becomes a coping, which is a maladaptive coping, but nevertheless a coping. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, some of it really applies to like domestic violence.
Yeah.
And the other piece too, I heard that it takes about 20 minutes for the frontal cortex to kind of kick back in.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how long. I've read that and I can't remember, but yeah, it takes a little while. So that's why if somebody's in an out of control rage, that's not the time to try to like, you know, you just need to kind of give them the space and not trigger them further. So, all right, any other questions? Comments? Okay, thank you guys for